So I want to, good morning, everyone who's on the line. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jeffrey Krellinston, and I'm publisher of Research Money. Our editorial team has been reporting on Canadian science, technology, and innovation policy and investment for over 30 years. And our annual conference was supposed to be happening yesterday and today at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. But for obvious reasons, we had to move it to the fall. So the conference will take place on October 19th and 20th, either in Ottawa or in cyberspace, depending on what the virus decides to do. And all 5 CEOs of Superclusters will be involved in that conference as well. So until then, Research Money will be holding webinars like this to hear from leaders in Canada's innovation ecosystem. So today, I'm delighted to welcome the CEOs of Canada's 5 innovation superclusters for a conversation on coping with COVID-19. So let me introduce our 5 panelists first. And when I introduce you, just say hi and wave so everyone knows who you are. So Sue Paish is the CEO of Canada's Digital Supercluster. Hi, Sue.
Hello.
Bill Greuel is CEO of Protein Industries Canada. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Jason Myers is CEO of Next Generation Manufacturing. Hi, Jay.
Great. Hi, Jeff.
Julien Biot is CEO of SCLAI. Hi, Julien.
Hi, Jeff.
And Kendra McDonald is CEO of Canada's Ocean Supercluster. Hi, Kendra.
Hi there.
So the Innovation Supercluster Initiative is a major plank in the government's innovation agenda. We all know that. And with an investment of almost $1 billion, the goal is to build and grow strong centers of expertise and commerce in technology sectors, key technology sectors. The superclusters together involve hundreds of companies and public sector institutions. After a startup phase, by the beginning of this year, they were going full steam ahead when COVID-19 hit. So we're going to start by asking each of you to briefly describe what stage you were at just before the pandemic and how the pandemic has affected your member companies. Each of you will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll take questions. And participants, whoever's on the line, please type your questions, which you can direct to a specific panelist or the panel as a whole. After we take questions for a while, I'll come back to the panelists to cover 1 or 2 final issues, and the webinar will end at 12:30. So, Sue, where was the digital supercluster at the beginning of the year, and how are you coping with COVID-19?
Thanks, Jeffrey. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this, and Jeffrey, thank you for organizing this. First of all, excuse me, I'd like to do a big shout out to anyone that's on the line from healthcare, from any of our first responder sectors, and to any of our public servants, whether they be provincial, municipal, or federal. We're certainly living in interesting times, and every engagement that I've had with, whether it's Government of Canada or any of the provincial ministries, I'm hearing a level of dedication, hard work, and a commitment to the interests of Canada that is really amazing, and I'm very, very grateful for what you are doing. So thank you. I know many of you are burning the candle at both ends. And that includes the folks out in British Columbia in the digital supercluster. Before March 13th, we had been very, very active. We have a very active membership, over 500 organizations now involved. I think it was 565 I saw last night. And we run competitive calls. So every 6 months, we run calls for proposals with a focus on 3 main industries: health, precision health, natural resources, and industrial applications. Industrial applications really being more infrastructure, transportation, and things of that sort. So we've run, as of, interestingly, March 12th, we had completed 3 calls. We actually had a board meeting on March 11th where we selected the projects from our 3rd call. So as of the day of the shutdown, if you will, we had 21 active projects, 28 after we did the selections. So we've got a series of projects that are under contracting right now. What I'll say about those projects and how they've progressed and how they were as of March 12th is the following. Not a single project has canceled as a result of COVID. The level of dedication of our members and the commitment to delivering on the outcomes of their project, really, truly amazing. And we've got about, across those projects, the first 21, about $40 million committed. That's not including industry commitment of about 60. So every project is proceeding. The projects that we selected in our board meeting on March 11th have all agreed to contract. Some of them have completed their contract and a number of them have launched. So that shows a level of enthusiasm and dedication to innovation and digital technologies across a broad spectrum of companies across the country. I'll just give you a couple of 4 examples in respect of the kinds of projects that we're dealing with. One of the biggest issues that faces Canada right now is the impacts of climate change. We're seeing it as we speak right now in Fort McMurray. Forest fires, floods, things that happen because of climate change. One of our projects, Earth Data Store, is developing a platform using Canadian-built Earth observation satellites to help us better predict, mitigate, and forecast the extreme weather events that might happen, and thereby give communities, municipalities, citizens an opportunity to prepare, to mitigate the impacts of these, and to make sure that we don't see the kind of devastation that we're seeing now. That project launched is out of cycle 1 and is expanding rapidly. So we expect to see a lot more from that project in the near future. The other project I'll just call out, and I could go through all 21, but that would take a lot more than 5 minutes. The other project I'll call out is Freshwater Data Commons, a very interesting project that is one of the first ones where we actually have pan-Canadian involvement. So while we're focused or headquartered in British Columbia, we now have projects that involve organizations from across the country. Canada is a country, as we know, with an abundance of freshwater systems, whether they be lakes, streams, rivers, creeks. We do not have a single data platform to manage or monitor the health of this critical ecosystem in Canada. So our Freshwater Data Commons, which involves big companies like Teck Resources, international, obviously well-known mining company, and led by a smaller company, Carl Data Solutions, they are building the first ever platform for the management of freshwater across the country. So we'll have a single source of truth of what does a healthy freshwater system look like. They're starting with the Columbia Basin in southeastern British Columbia, and then we'll expand that across the country. So that's a sense of where we were at as of March, let's call it March 12th. Then COVID happened over the weekend and we all shut down. A couple of things have happened. I probably speak for most of my colleagues on the call. We all had full-time jobs as of March 12th, then we got another full-time job, and that was COVID. So immediately, we recognized an opportunity for this supercluster and the environment we create to address the big problems coming out of COVID. And that's what we do in our supercluster. We deliver solutions to some of Canada's industries and society's biggest problems. And we saw immediate problems coming out of COVID. Before I get to our COVID program, I'll say that in that first weekend, we recognized a gap between the supply of critical equipment and the supply of critical equipment. And literally over the space of a weekend, Bill Tam, our co-founder of our supercluster, working with the province of British Columbia and some smaller companies, sponsored in part by the BC Business Council, created a platform that's now become the supply hub. As of last week, that supply hub had connected suppliers and customers with 4 billion units of PPE. That supply hub is active, very active, obviously, in British Columbia. It's being launched next week in Alberta, and we're in discussions with provinces across the country to run that out across the country. That happened quite literally in the space of about 72 hours. That was built. Shortly thereafter, we launched our COVID program. We now have 8 projects that we have selected with a total investment of $13.5 million, growing if those projects expand, which we expect they will. A couple of examples of those projects. Project called XRay, spelled XRAI. And this deals with the significant issue that our hospital workers face, especially in remote rural areas, where you have people in the emergency room receiving patients who might have COVID, who are getting lung X-rays, and there's no radiologists around. There's no one to help them interpret that X-ray. What the X-ray project is doing is providing handheld devices that is infused with AI, that is a clinical decision support tool, so that when the X-ray or the image is taken of the lung, that clinician, whether they be an emergency room physician or somebody who has come in on call, they can be advised that this image is consistent with the image that one would see in a COVID impacted patient. Imagine the kind of help that that provides to the physician and the quality of care that that provides to the patient. That's one example of a project that we have. Another project that we have through our COVID program is one that we call Beacon, where DNA Stack out of Toronto is creating a platform where global researchers around the world can openly yet securely share the research data that they are coming across and using for the development of therapies, vaccines, and understanding the evolution of this virus. Again, this is a first, to have a platform where the researchers can share this kind of data securely and openly. Again, I could go through all 8 projects, Jeffrey, but I've used up my time. I want to give a big thank you to all of the members of the Digital Supercluster, all of our staff. We really are working at 24/7. We have it, while we've selected 8 projects, that only gives us 342 proposals to review. We have over 350 proposals that have come in, and we're now working hand in glove with ISED to make sure that we fast track the proposals that meet the biggest problems that are being faced by Canadians as a result of COVID. So it's a busy time, it's a very gratifying time, and it's really rewarding to be able to participate at this time in the COVID situation. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Sue. We'll move to Bill. I want to just throw in a question that you can build into your answers. Are you noticing, so there's 2 aspects. One, what we're doing to help combat the crisis, which you alluded to, not alluded to, you told us about, and also how it's affecting your member companies. And one of the things I've been wondering is it affecting the scale-ups and the larger companies differently from the startups, and what are you doing to help them, if anything, or are you focusing mostly on trying to solve the COVID with some of these exciting projects? And I know all of you have projects coming in. So let's move to Bill. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. So it's an I maybe want to take a cue from my colleague in BC and throw out a thank you to kind of the food service and the food distribution workers in Canada as well. It's a very difficult time for the food distribution systems in Canada, domestically and internationally, and food service workers represent, food service and food retail represent some of the frontline workers that Sue had mentioned, and a really critical time for that industry to maintain. So a big thank you. So Protein Industries Canada, you know, where were we prior to the world changed? You know, we're operating in what is the largest employer in the country, the agri-food space. It employs, you know, 2.1 million Canadians. It contributes, you know, almost 7% to Canada's GDP. It is a large sector, and our supercluster is operating and growing to support that. We've got 185 members at Protein Industries Canada, and we've got 11 active projects on the go. So we've got a total investment that we've made to date of about $60.5 million, and industry partnership another $67 million for a total project bank of $128 million. What's interesting is that this was all pre-COVID, and I would say, as Sue did, that the interest and the optimism in the agriculture, ingredient, and food processing space has been quite high. And post-COVID, we've launched our third call for proposals. We have not had any of our projects fall off, but I will talk about the implications and challenges that COVID has presented to our members. But for the most part, the optimism in the sector, which is agriculture production, ingredient processing, is quite high, and it is always great this time of year because it's springtime in the prairies, and we're heading into spring planting, and the provinces out here are starting to green up, so it's always a sense of optimism this time of year, and COVID hasn't slowed that down. But if we back up a couple of weeks, just around mid-March, where everything started to change, on the heels of when everybody had to shut down the economy, we pushed out a survey to our members and asked, what's really impacting you and affecting you. I would say the biggest issues that are coming back for our members in the face of COVID is access to capital, and so access to working capital. So many of the companies we work with are pre-revenue stage or early revenue stage, and the work that we're doing at Protein Industries Canada and co-investing with them is incremental work, highly innovative work, and when access to working capital dries up, companies tend to pull back on research and development investments. We're happy to say that most companies have found a way to access working capital and keep the projects going, which is highly positive. I think it speaks to the resilience of the people who operate and the entrepreneurs that operate in the space. And I think it speaks to the optimism of the sector. And I'll talk a little bit about what we think the recovery for agriculture, ingredient manufacturing, and food manufacturing will look like. I think the other challenge that our members are facing is access to growth capital. We had a number of organizations that were out seeking capital raises for building of infrastructure. That growth capital market is very tight right now, and we don't have a good line of sight into when that will fully recover. And so really working with our members to try to understand that and work with the capital community to educate them on the opportunity that is agriculture and food processing. I don't think it's a surprise to most people on the phone that we might not be the first landing spot for growth capital, Western Canadian agriculture and food processing sector, but we are gaining some headway with the capital community looking at the agriculture and food processing space as a good, strong investment as we come out of the COVID-19 disruption. I think the other thing that we're probably seeing is supply chain disruption for our members. And, you don't have to look too far to see what's happening in terms of the food processing sector now with the shutdown of meat processing facilities. There's a lot of talk in the U.S. of potato processing facilities shutting down. It's largely two reasons driving that. One is the spread of COVID-19 in processing facilities, and the other reason is a collapse of the food service and the restaurant industry, really reducing demand for things like French fries and bacon, which is really slowing down the meat processing sector. So, I will come back to what we think is the long term, but in addition to growth capital, supply chain disruption, and some issues and challenges with plant shutdowns, I think the other thing that we're seeing is a bit of market distortion happening. The U.S. taking very aggressive investments in primary production, making $19 billion available for producers in the U.S. as a measure. I think our government of Canada, I'll come back to this maybe in policy recommendations, needs to think about that a little bit as well. But In terms of our response to COVID, we were very conscientious. We did not issue a specific call for research projects related to food and food processing. We don't believe there will be a food shortage in Canada driven by COVID-19. We will see supply chain disruptions. You might not be able to get all of the food products and the array of food products that we wanted, but there's no reason to believe that Canada will suffer large-scale food shortages as a result of COVID-19. So we are really focused on helping our companies through the immediate short term with some work we're doing in terms of access to capital and growth capital, and really trying to set up our members for a quick recovery post-COVID-19. We do believe that the agriculture, ingredient manufacturing, and food processing sectors will be ones that will come through this relatively strong and will be able to recover relatively quickly. And we need to help position Canada and Canadian companies for growth on the post-COVID-19. And so maybe, Jeffrey, I'll leave my comments at that, and we'll come back to some of the longer-term implications maybe later.
Great, thank you. That was really interesting. So Jay, why don't you take it from here? Where were you?
Yeah, thanks very much.
How is everyone reacting? Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Jeff. Bonjour à toutes et tous. Thanks, first of all, Jeff, for organizing today's discussion. I think it's a really good catch-up for everybody around the important role superclusters are playing. And very much like Sue and Bill, and I'm sure Kendra and Julianne, I want to make a shout out to everybody who's on the front line, and maybe particularly in my case, to all the manufacturers and the tech companies that have stood up to, in many cases, volunteer production, but to pivot so quickly to produce critical products and even more importantly, in many cases, the components and materials required to through the supply chain and what is probably one of the biggest challenges facing Canada right now. Get back to that in a minute. We were Ingen, the Advanced Manufacturing Supercluster. Our mandate is to develop world-leading advanced manufacturing capabilities in Canada by leveraging our technology, our research, and of course our manufacturing strengths across the country. Our supercluster has about 2,500 members from representing all provinces and 2 territories. And I think it's important in terms of trying to define what a supercluster actually is, to recognize that not only is our membership across Canada, but the participation in our projects are also bringing strengths together from across the country. So currently, and I don't think there is a distinction in our minds between what was happening pre and post COVID. Our mainstream projects are going ahead. I think a lot of that is thanks to the processes we put in place, the networks that we've established. In our experience, it takes time to build really robust projects around advanced manufacturing. This is not just a simple case of bringing tech companies and manufacturers together and coming up with something that is miraculous. It takes an awful lot of time to come up with the solution that is really world leading. The strategic objectives our board has set is that these have to be unique projects. They have to position Canada in a world leading position in advanced manufacturing. They need to be collaborative. So we require all of our projects to involve at least 3 companies, and they have to be industry led. They have to be close to commercialization. And so our focus is really on standing up production, going from prototype to pilot production stage and testing in a manufacturing environment. And 4th, they have to contribute something to the ecosystem. So all of our projects, we expect to contribute something by way of training or test beds or IP for commercialization in other sectors of manufacturing. So that's a tall order to meet. And we spent most of last year working with companies to put together, I think, a number of really innovative projects. We have we have an open process. Any member of a supercluster or membership is open. Any member can apply to lead a project or participate in a project. We have an open call for proposals. And what we found is that project development stage is really where we've had to concentrate our efforts over the past year. So by the end of March, we had 15 projects approved, worth something in total around $76 million, of which the Ingen Supercluster funding was somewhere in the area of $30 million. And our projects have ranged from developing new stem cell manufacturing capabilities to improving processes and equipment around steel forming and around hot ladle steel manufacturing. They've incorporated aerospace as well as auto and food processing in a number of the digital applications of projects. So we have a wide array of different types of projects in the advanced manufacturing field. When the COVID crisis struck mid-March, we thought that projects would slow down, but very much like Sue and Bill, we've seen our mainstream projects continue. That's not to say that companies are not facing some pretty significant cash flow shortages or cash constraints here. I think even the larger companies are doing that. Some of the smaller companies in particular are under cash constraints, and particularly for early stage technology companies or even companies that are looking at scaling up their production. So one way we've responded to that is to provide those companies with an advance rather than work on a reimbursement basis, and that's helped us cement our project pipeline. Right now we have 151 applications in our mainstream project pipeline, and we are, for those companies that have been approved and are contracting and we're funding right now, we're checking project by project to assess what the health of the project is. If anything, we have not seen any projects canceled. We've not seen any companies drop out of the projects, but we have seen some postponement of project spending, and I think that's to be expected. And we're keeping track, monitoring each of the projects that we're funding. With COVID, I think it was important. We were in a good position because of the extent of our network. We were able to identify companies that not only could stand up production and pivot quickly to produce new types of healthcare products, but as I was saying before, even some of the materials components that go into those the final product. We had a good process in place that helped us pivot quickly to look at new COVID projects rather than the mainstream advanced manufacturing projects. I said certainly assisted by being able to see some flexibility in terms of our funding. So in particular, our ability to fund one particular or individual companies and to provide up to 100% of funding for COVID projects. And maybe come back to that in a minute. But the processes we have in place, the independent assessments and the network of assessors, the network of companies, I think put us in a really strong position to be able to move very rapidly to put in place funding for COVID projects. But I have to say this isn't just us. I see our contribution to the COVID effort as really an all-of-government contribution, including provincial governments, leveraging our networks with the provincial governments, leveraging our networks with regional development agencies, with NRC, with IRAP, of course, with ISED, with Health Canada, with PHAC. So our projects that we are funding in our COVID stream, and we've allocated originally $50 million. We'll exceed that total in terms of the amount of money we'll be investing in COVID projects. But we're working very closely with government agencies, provincial and federal, to identify priorities for projects. We started off by funding one of the ventilator projects that has been adopted for procurement by the federal government. We then went to test kits, which the federal government is now looking at running a challenge for test kit procurement. We were out in front of that, funded 3 test kits that are very high in the running for procurement by the federal government. but also a range of other PPE, face shields, N95 masks, surgical masks, gowns, and so forth, and as well as components, things like filters for N95 masks, filters for ventilators, valves, microelectronics that go into some of these products. But I have to say, most those funding programs are important. We've funded 11 COVID projects already, have invested close to $30 million of Ingen funding into those projects. But a couple of things I'd say, first of all, about the projects. While we were able to fund up to 100% to one company, in reality, these are collaborative projects. Most of the COVID projects include probably 4 or 5 different companies, research organizations, universities, laboratories. So they are collaborative, and they are transformative. These are we're funding the production startup of a number of very new, innovative types of devices, of technologies, of capabilities for manufacturing, and I think that's very important to recognize. And then these projects are also, I think, extremely important in terms of us being able to meet the government's priorities for the types of product that we're looking for, and then of course all of the supply chain behind that, materials and components. So the funding is important, but I would say even more so, it's our ability to channel good companies that have capabilities into the procurement channels, both of the federal government and the provincial governments here, or into other funding mechanisms. The federal government has launched challenges around ventilators, nasal swabs, filter material for N95 masks, test kits, a variety of different procurement mechanisms here. From our point of view, this is our role here is not to fund these projects directly. Our role is to direct good projects or good applications, good companies into those procurement channels, and we've been, in fact, very active in doing that. We have about 300 applications, COVID applications on the go right now. The total request funding requirement is, if we were to fund everything, is $1.5 billion there. So we're not going to be able to do that. But what we are doing is working through a triage, directing companies into IRAP challenges, NRC challenges, procurement, other procurement contracts, purchase orders. Much better to get a purchase order than to come to us for funding to then have to go and get a purchase order. So we're working very, very closely with all of those federal departments, federal agencies, provincial governments as well. And I think that's what has really led what I think is to a successful response. Of course, we're, like everybody else, wondering how long this is going to last. But we're certainly willing to continue to fund COVID projects going forward.
Great. You actually you raised an interesting point that the superclusters are almost, how should I put it? It's a triage mechanism for the procurement process. That so they don't have to go out and sort of, play roulette on finding a company here or a company there. You've done all this due diligence with these companies, and you become a funnel almost. When there's a huge purpose, like let's solve this crisis, and the government really knows what it wants to do, then it makes it easier. A very interesting point. I'm sure you're all playing in that. So Julien, why don't we move to you, SCLAI?
Well, good morning, everybody, and very happy to be here. Thanks, Jeffrey, to put that together. And I want also to join my friends at the other superclusters in congratulating all the teams in SCLAI, outside of SCLAI, in the public and all the public service that is really working very hard in this crisis. Regarding SCLAI, obviously we had before March 13th and after March 13th. Before March 13th, I think we had a very good traction. Our initial plan was to cover more or less to fund $65 million for the full year 2019-2020 of gross value of projects. We have finished the year close to 120 million, so almost 2 times our initial objective. In terms of funding, we were forecasting to commit around $35 million of funding. who have committed more than $45 million of funding. So we were in a very good dynamic. That's for industrial projects. On the side, as you possibly remember, SCLAI had also other streams. We have launched successfully our acceleration program, dedicated to fund incubators and accelerators across the country to help them support the startups in the supply chain AI ecosystem. We have also begun to roll out our talent program with the support of Government of Quebec, training people and validating programs, public training, private training in Quebec for the beginning, preparing to launch our talent program across Canada. Same thing on AI and supply chain. So we're in a very good shape. Obviously, 13th of March, we had so first of all the team went to full work for home. So we were a small team, nine people, but still it's a very different way of working. And obviously we had to do two different things. One is we had to tackle some emergencies in our portfolio of projects. We still have 20 projects running from a SCLAI perspective, validated, running, funded. Obviously, some of them, if I name some of them, you will consider that the industries we were working with had a lot of trouble. If I name Air Canada, Bombardier, or CAE, you will recognize that this industry were really hurt by the coronavirus crisis. So our first priority was obviously to be sure that we could help this company face the crisis and continue their projects, because we recognize that working in AI in Air Canada, for example, was a very critical project for them and for the country. So we had to find ways to accommodate, not changing the money we gave, but the way we would giving it. Typically working much more with advances than we used to do, concerned specifically for salaries and wages, internal wages, because obviously that was the critical aspect they needed to tackle. They were laying off tens of thousands of people. They didn't want to lay off the AI specialists they had that were hard to recruit for them. So we went to a mechanism where we're able to support by an advance funding mechanism the wages for these people to let them keep them on board and not lose them and continue the project. So our first emergency was obviously to solve the crisis for some of our very critical projects, and specifically in the aerospace industry. That took us some time, beginning mid-March. And of course, the second thing was how could we help on the COVID-19 relief effort for the country. We've launched call for projects. So on our specialty, which is how we could work on resource optimization in this COVID-19 era. So on supply chain activities, we have received close to 150 projects, all on resource optimization. Finally, we have selected 10 projects in very different areas, but all on resource optimization. So the first projects we have validated were quite interesting. They were really on how to optimize medical resources, both on call centers and with work at home allocation, and to support people that needed care at home and could not have anybody at home to support them. So that was an interesting project we have validated to both with Alaya Care and Dialogue to support. And then we had different projects more linked to allocation of resources in supply chain activities with the Port of Montreal, with Loblaws, with Air Canada and others to be sure that we could help deliver critical resources when that was needed. Interestingly, also, we have continued working on our acceleration program. And the Creative Destruction Lab Global in Toronto came to us with a very interesting project called Recovery, help basically startups or grown-ups to strive and to survive during this crisis, with two focus, one on public health, the other on global recovery. And we have decided to fund this initiative that's really beginning of May, ending end of August, where a lot of companies around the world and in Canada will be supported by mentors with more accessibility to financing and funding in these difficult times, with a specialty on public health on one side and economic recovery on the other side. So we have decided to fund more or less 2/3 of the envelope needed to support the Creative Destruction Lab recovery program. So that's overall what we did. Obviously, right now we have ended our first phase of COVID-19 projects. The reason is we have received a lot of projects, and as I said, we're focused on a very interesting one. We are considering also working in the second phase on COVID-19 projects, more on hospital. We know there are more difficult subjects to tackle there, but hospitals are very interesting in this context. They have a lot of supply chain issues. You saw the communication yesterday in Ontario, where Ontario said possibly up to 35 people have died from heart issues because they were not able to have surgery on time. We think also it's a critical aspect. So we'll try to see if we can help hospitals solve their own supply chain by doing a call for projects for hospital in this COVID-19 related issues on supply chain. So that's where we are as of today. And obviously we'll continue to work on normal supply chain projects. I think on our side, this crisis has really shown that supply chain issues were core for the country, and we needed to look at that. The mission of SCLAI is AI introduction to supply chain. Our feeling is that really demonstrated the purpose we had and the validity of the purpose we had. And so obviously we are continue to work on different projects with supply chain, not with the 100 financing as we did for COVID-19 projects, but on our normal way of financing with collaboration, introduction of SMEs. So we continue the work we've already done in the past. But we really clearly see that our initial mission, introduction of AI in supply chain, is totally relevant in this global context. So that's where we are, and happy to take questions from the crowd anytime after our discussion.
One quick question. You mentioned some of the sectors, like particularly in transportation, are having to lay off a lot of people. And how are you convincing them not to lay off the AI teams?
So actually, that's a discussion we had with them. Obviously, actually, they didn't want either to lay off the AI team. They know that the people they already hired are tough to recruit, tough to keep. So if you lose them now, not sure you can hire them again in the next 6 months or 12 months. And they know that one of the critical issues post-crisis will be how to leverage best resources. If you think about Air Canada, meaning post-crisis Air Canada will have multiple challenges involving AI. What line to open? What kind of line to reopen first? With what capacity? So they know they need to keep that competence alive in their companies. And so obviously they came back to us saying, well, we don't want to lay off these people. What could we do? Our normal mechanism of funding is paying back expenses at the end of the quarter. So for internal resources, Air Canada typically had to fund a 3 month of internal wages before having any money back from the supercluster. So what we try to do is smoothen that up to be sure that they can receive money sooner, and so finally have the funding for their wages sooner than that, not having cash problem to keep these people. So that's what we tried. We tried to adjust to every category. Not every industry was hit the same way. So we tried to adapt our answer, but obviously, if you think about the aerospace industry, the hit was very, very hard, meaning 90% of the revenues disappeared instantly. So we were particularly looking at how to help them keep these people
on the wages. On the wages, I imagine the federal government wage subsidy will help for some of those people that they keep.
They will, but we had to take the decision before that was announced and before they were deemed eligible for that. So obviously we'll recalculate that post-COVID, but we'll only give the difference. But actually we could provide money immediately. We were able to fund money immediately beginning of April. So it was much faster than any other. And I think that's also demonstrating what superclusters can do. I mean, Jeff, Jay, Bill, Sue, everybody talked about this. You talked about this is how we're able to fund with the right governance, the right mechanism, fund very fast in the industry with the right rules, the right support, the right governance, the right audits in a sense. We're able to fund money fast, and typically that we're able to move money much faster than anybody else could do because we're with the right governance and the right controls. So I think that's a testimony of what superclusters can do in a time of crisis.
Great. So Kendra, the ocean economy, let's hear how it hit you.
Yeah, so first, let me join my colleagues with a huge thank you. And I know for me, just looking across the entire ecosystem and the consistent focus on people and keeping people safe and well. So whether it is trying to keep them on a site, whether it is helping them to be effective in working from home, trying to keep them connected in new ways, trying to work with them if you're not able to keep them employed. There's just been a consistent conversation around how to help people and keep them well. And so just really appreciate that. You know, from an ocean perspective, start with pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, you know, the Ocean Supercluster is very focused on cross-sectoral collaboration. So we have over 160 members across 13 sectors of the ocean economy and across the country. And so what we're focused on is getting sort of non-traditional collaborations, whether it's across a region or it's across sectors and working together. And we were getting really good momentum with that. And so we had over, through various stages of contracting, over $30 million of Supercluster money committed and almost $90 million of projects. And so, and we had just launched our startup project on the ecosystem side, which was focused on a number of in-person events, and I think they got through 2 just before March 13th. So very quickly, we had to pivot, like everyone, look at how we continue to move our projects forward in a different environment, look at how we could support our members. So if you look at ocean, so number one, we didn't have like Bill in proteins, we don't have a specific COVID program, but the ocean sectors have been very hard hit with COVID. So whether you look at offshore oil and gas and just what has happened to oil and gas as COVID has been happening and what that means for Canada, very, very significant and expected to last certainly far beyond the immediate COVID impacts. As well as a fishery, and so both in terms of demand with restaurants and cruise lines not operating, as well as with just delays in being able to keep people safe working on boats. And so that is another sector that's been hit. And so, and we're expecting those impacts to be certainly longer, certainly medium term. And we were just getting ready to launch. This is meant to be an amazing year for ocean. Just getting ready to launch the UN Decade of Ocean. There was a major event that was meant to take place in Lisbon in June. And so, you know, just working through with companies. So on our projects, how can we be helpful? So looking at, like I think Bill made the comment around cash flow and working capital. How do we get advances? How do we get dollars to projects faster? How do we continue to work with our pipeline, basically project by project, trying to make sure that we're able to help? So at this stage, the projects are continuing to move forward. The timing might look a little bit different, but there's a real commitment across the members and across the ocean economy to be able to continue to move things forward and recognize that there remains a tremendous opportunity in the blue economy for Canada, given our natural geography as well as internationally. And we see the climate, climate change and impacts on ocean and all the challenges that the ocean was facing will continue. So how do we do that, and how do we best do that in a world where we've had some of our sort of big pieces of the ocean sector that are severely impacted in the short to medium term?
Yeah. We were going to, at noon, I wanted to move to the future. So I have about 10 minutes, and I want to just throw some questions from the audience that I got. One was, how are the superclusters, and this would be around COVID, but it could be around your normal practice, but how are they trying to ensure a coordinated rather than a shotgun approach to helping? So you've all been helping. I know that you meet regularly anyway. Is there some type of synergy that's going on in terms of coordinating your response? Any one of you could, or several of you could address that.
Yeah, well, Jeffrey, I'll thanks for the question. What you're seeing on this call is a 2-hour encapsulation of 5 people that work really closely together. We are very connected organizationally. Our teams meet in various contexts, whether it's CFOs or CTOs. The 5 of us are in regular conversations, sharing information. Hey, can you catch this one? Why don't you catch that one? Hey, I'm doing this. Well, I'm doing that too. Well, why don't we figure out a better way to do it? This in some ways is a micro ecosystem of how Canada's economy can work in the future. We share ideas, we support each other. There is a lot of commonality between some of the things that we're doing, whether it be in COVID or whether it be in ordinary course. And any one of us can pick up the phone at any time and bounce ideas, questions, or issues off each other. The other thing I'd say is we have, across the 5 of us, very good connected relationships with ISED. So the ISED team is a team that is working as much as anything could be a well-oiled machine right now, because we've never seen this environment before. The ISED team, in terms of how it's engaging with our superclusters and giving us good guidance, good support, and direction to make sure that we are addressing the biggest problems that Canadians need, I think that's working really well.
Anyone else?
I'd agree with Sue. I think we're working together very well, and also with certainly very close relationships with ISED. I think it's also true with other government agencies, federal and provincial too. I mean, I think all of us see ourselves as part of a solution, and not necessarily groups that are going to take things on their own without also a tremendous amount of coordination and collaboration with other agencies, and in fact with other parts of the private sector as well.
One related question, in a sense, maybe, and it might not affect all of the superclusters, but someone really wanted to know whether you're leveraging genomic solutions, and in that context, whether there's some cross collaboration around that particular technology for the COVID crisis. Is there anyone who can talk to that? I would imagine Bill would have something to say.
Yeah, I wouldn't in the context of COVID, but certainly genomic solutions to the work that we're doing. So we invest in what we would call the value chain approach to agriculture and food processing, everything from very early stage plant breeding that will have downstream influence on processing efficiency and human nutrition and functionality of the protein products that we're producing at the other end of the value chain. So a lot of work on genomics. We actually have a project with Corteva Canada. It's about a $27 million project looking at improving and increasing protein content in canola that has multiple gains down the value chain in terms of improving processing efficiency and the development of new products and technologies for the canola industry, which is heavily leveraged in genomics.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey, obviously, Canada's a global leader when it comes to genomic health. There are breakthroughs happening almost every day across Canada in the health space when it comes to genomics and genetics. Genome BC is a member of our supercluster, active member of our supercluster. We've got projects both COVID and non-COVID that leverage genomics in the health context, and we have a very exciting project non-COVID featuring Terramera, well-known agriculture company. I think works well with Bill, with your group as well. And they're applying genomic analysis and AI to helping discover new ways to combat wheat rust, which has been described as the polio of wheat, and it's migrating north as climate change makes it more amenable to the winter wheat crops in Bill's neighborhood. So we have genomics, I'd say, woven through a number of the areas that we focus on, and have a number of projects that leverage that, both in health and in other areas.
Good.
One of the remarks I would make just is we have to be always careful where is the limit between fundamental research and applications, in the sense that we can fund projects that use genomics in terms of actual application. Our mandate is not to fund fundamental research on genomics. So it's always the balance we try to find, and specifically in the COVID-19, we're very conscious about funding projects that were able to deliver something and not funding fundamental research, and that's the limit. We're not here to fund that. So that's the limit of what we can do or we can play with.
You touched on an issue.
I would agree with that. I think a number of our projects include some genomic element, except that we're not funding that the fundamental research. We're funding the scale up from prototype up to full scale production.
Yeah, the D of the R&D part. Yeah, that, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Someone from industry asked a question that I'll just read it, and I don't know whether it relates necessarily to COVID. It could relate to your normal operations, but how are you managing the plethora of requests for resources, and how do you determine what's most valuable, and in particular, what criteria are you using? I mean, it's a big challenge. You all talked about how many project proposals you're dealing with. So they want to know what criteria are you using, how are you dealing with the volume?
Well, I think Julien addressed this in his opening comments in focusing on governance. And you know, we're stewards of taxpayers' dollars, and we have an extremely significant responsibility to make sure that we deploy those dollars in the best possible way. So I can just give you a quick summary in digital, but if you go on any of the websites of any of the 5 superclusters, you will see program guides, and the program guides identify the focus of the program, the purpose of the projects, as well as the process, in which is bedded the criteria. And again, back to Julian's point, we don't fund fundamental research. To Jay's point earlier, absent COVID, we're not a slingshot for single organizations. This is about collaborative innovation. So does the project align with the purpose of your programs? We all have specific programs that focus on delivering outcomes. Does this project meet the requirements of the program? So minimum of 3 companies. In ours, one of those companies must be an SME. We also require that there be a university or post-secondary involved, because part of what we do is bridge fundamental research into application. So make sure that we bridge the research in there. But you'll see the program guides in there. Then we all have our own, I wouldn't say bespoke, we have our own evaluation processes, but they are all, I'd say, quite similar. So they all involve a certain level of independent evaluation. This isn't the supercluster staff picking projects. We have independent experts that in our case evaluate the quality and the leadership of the technology. Is there a market? Is this a real consortia rather than one company with a couple of add-ons? Do they have a good project plan? Do they have a good sense of a timeline and how they're going to deliver their outcomes? And does their budget hang together? So these are some of the criteria that are evaluated, both through an independent review as well as through a staff review. And then I think all of us have a project selection committee that makes the final decision. And that selection in our supercluster is then ratified by our board to make sure that we follow due process.
If I can add something, and obviously that's exactly what she was described. Typically in our case for the COVID-19 projects, because it was 100% funding, and we are on the software industry, we have required that all software developed through this program at a kind of open source or IP available for anybody. So because we have some relaxed constraint in terms of collaboration, we wanted to be sure that because we fund 100%, all software we develop under that contract would be made available to competition, to anybody who wants to use it, obviously in Canada, not for foreign companies' purposes, but can be available because it's public funding. So typically, that was a way to mitigate and to make the best use of taxpayer money, which is if we fund it 100% for COVID-19, that's right. We relax some constraint like collaboration, that's right. But in that case, the other constraint is on the intellectual property aspect. Every foreground RP developed will be made to a certain extent available to anybody.
Great. So I want to move to looking at the future now. I mean, I'm at home, you're all at home, everyone on the, I hope everyone on the call is safe at home. We're doing business in a different way, some not as different if you were very virtual in the before, but a lot of changes. So my question I want to move to is, have you learned anything from dealing with the crisis that will change the way you operate after the crisis has passed? So I want to start with Jay on that one, based on the call we had before.
Sure. I think there are a number of areas where we've learned and will be important in terms of determining what sort of projects we're going to be funding, how we're going to do that going forward. And maybe to make one point that I don't think any of the superclusters think themselves only as funding agencies, where I think we all are playing a very important role on being in the front line with our tech companies, or well, in our case, manufacturing companies and our other members, and being able to understand some of the challenges and the opportunities that they're facing, and also then communicate that to policymakers, but also to other corporate leaders as well. So the first thing I'd say about the future is that the last month has been a blur. In fact, the last year has been a blur in terms of we're all startups and expected to operate as fully functioning large companies here, but we've all achieved that, and so that blur is continuing. When we talk about the future, sort of there's the immediate future, the sort of the future in terms of what the recovery looks like, or and how we can support that, and then I think some longer-term strategic issues about the future as well. So just in the immediate future, I've got to say we've all become experts on webinars and teleconferences, which has helped. We ran a collaboration day yesterday with 21 different project pitches, and over 500 people registered. There were a few tech glitches in that, but it's business as usual. We're still looking for robust project proposals that are world leading and that are collaborative and meet our strategic requirements. Even on the our COVID projects, the strategic requirements still have to be met. Our collaboration is still important in selecting those projects. I'd say one thing that we have done, and I think this applies to all of the superclusters, is we're working much more closely with government agencies, particularly with ISED, but also with other government agencies, and this has helped, I think, strengthen the role of superclusters as agencies for to help coordinate. We all have mandates that are in some cases the scope of our mandate is beyond that of any particular federal department or even level of government here. So I think that we play an important role in coordinating and in helping to facilitate collaboration across government, but also, of course, with industry. So that's one thing I think that is going to continue. Second thing, though, is as we prepare going forward, we've pivoted our first COVID projects, and speaking directly to them, our first COVID projects were simply about meeting short-term shortages and critical requirements with respect to products, PPE, ventilators, test kits to fight COVID. now we're working much more in collaboration with other funding agencies and with government departments to do that. And so we've pivoted now to looking at, well, where are some of the strategic gaps? Where can we focus our funding and other types of activities to help fill some of those gaps, and particularly as we go into a recovery stage. So last week we launched a challenge to develop and to manufacture disinfecting robots. I think these would be very useful, for instance, in opening up not only cleaning hospitals and potentially long-term care facilities, but also in opening up factories and opening up other public spaces going forward. I think that's it's certainly a strategic decision on our part to do that, but it's a strategic complement contribution, I think, to opening up the economy. We're facilitating peer-to-peer networks and discussions about opening up the economy as a whole, but what does it take for manufacturers to open up? What is the role of technology in that? What's the path forward here? And there is no one path forward. There are no standards. There are no guidelines right now that can be met. So that discussion, particularly among senior executives, is extremely important. And that's the type of intelligence that I think all the superclusters can pass on to policymakers along the way. As we move forward, though, I think we have learned a couple of things from the crisis. One is some of the risks around our dependence on extended supply chains, on just-in-case supply chain management, on our dependence on imports from countries that don't seem to be too adverse to restricting exports, even of critical products, let alone the materials components that go into those products. I think we've also learned that we've lost a lot of capacity, manufacturing capacity in Canada, not only for really to support those the manufacturing of those critical products here in the country. And I think those are lessons that and opportunities for policymakers going forward. What are the critical products that we require in the country to fight crises like this? And do we have secure supply, particularly of the higher value complex components and in some cases materials that go into those critical products? So that is a discussion, and we're focusing on beginning that discussion now. But I think the other thing that we've learned is as a result of the crisis, the really important role that advanced manufacturing plays, the flexibility that companies have to pivot to different types of manufacturing, come up with different solutions to fight the COVID crisis, whether that's on the part of auto parts companies or aerospace companies, or just simply developing new innovative medical devices and medical technologies. All of that's extremely important, and it's the capability that companies have, not only in terms of management and the products that they're producing, but of course the flexibility of advanced manufacturing processes and advanced manufacturing technologies that have allowed them to do that. So I think that is an important lesson, underlining, I think, the importance of what we're all doing as superclusters in our areas of focus. And I would also underline, especially on the manufacturing side, here it's probably elevated the profile of manufacturing, the importance of advanced manufacturing to Canadians as a whole, and that's something that we need to build on. Not only the economic contribution, but showing, and I think it's not only on with COVID, with respect to our COVID projects, but to our other projects as well. These are not only projects to stand up manufacturing and create jobs in manufacturing, and to build up investment in manufacturing in Canada. These are jobs that deliver real benefits to Canadians and people around the world in terms of life-saving products, in terms of environmental remediation, in terms of food security and water security. And of course, healthcare. We're solving real social challenges here, and that's what manufacturing does. That's what the strength of our technology does. So these, while superclusters were set up to encourage economic growth and provide a real impetus to innovation and so forth, I think it's what we've all shown is that at the end of the day, that carries huge benefits, and the COVID crisis only underlines, I think, the importance of what we're all doing in terms of providing those benefits to Canadians.
Jeffrey, I'm just gonna give you 5 words in answer to your question. Just 5 words: agility, speed, collaboration, resilience, outcomes. That's what we've learned. We can move fast. We're really agile. We deliver outcomes. We do it collaboratively, and we are an incredibly resilient economy. And let's not let the glass half empty conversations take away from the learnings of the past 7 weeks. Those 5 words, I think, define how these superclusters have worked, but they've also defined how government is working, how industry is working, and how the Canadian population have really responded to this.
And I'm going to come back to you, Sue, on a very specific thing. I'll give you the heads up. In a crisis like this, we really feel for the people who have been affected adversely. We really feel for the people on the front lines trying to make things better for people. But I want to come back to you for a minute on, there are silver linings in bad situations, and there's a lot of opportunities. And it resonates with a participant's question, which I'll share with you. But before I come to that, I want to just ask Bill to build on this learning, because particularly around the food chain, you were saying some really interesting things when we had a call about that.
Yeah, maybe just to level set, Canada's in a unique position. We're one of few jurisdictions globally that's a net exporter of food, and that's a good thing. But we need to put that in the context of what we think might be the lasting effects of something like COVID-19. So Canada's the 5th largest net exporter of food. We're also the 5th largest net importer of food, and that's really because of the fruit and vegetable industry, a northern climate. Not a huge food processing industry in terms of consumer packaged goods, and so just remember those dynamics as I speak through this. But the long-term issues and challenges that we might see from something like COVID-19, Jay talked about supply chain. I don't need to touch on that one, but the one thing that I think we're really going to see long-term here is protectionism and domestication of global food supply chains. Kazakhstan, for instance, a large net exporter of food, just a few days ago banned the export of flour and cereals because there is concerns around protecting food supply chains. And so if you look globally, there's large jurisdictions that are not self-sufficient in food. It's the EU, it's China, it's Korea, Japan. Coming on the heels of a crisis like this, they're going to be making some moves to create strategic alliances or to ensure that they're in a situation where disruption of global supply chains for food are not going to impact their citizens. And so we really need to think about that in terms of the value proposition that we're offering globally, in terms of the food that we're offering around ingredient suppliers versus commodities. This idea of moving from commodity provider to ingredient supplier. Thinking about the value add that we can provide economies, wealthy economies that are not self-sufficient in terms of the environmental impact of the food that we're producing, the nutritional benefits, the functionality of the foods that we're producing. So I think there will be some long-term effects that we really need to consider in Canada's food system and how we're approaching strategic alliance with our export markets, because this idea of protectionism and domestication of global food supply chains, I think, will be a lasting effect of COVID-19.
It's sobering. So moving to the opportunity, I'm going to read a question and then we'll come to Sue, and then I think there's probably opportunities around value chains, around SCLAI, certainly the ocean economy. How do we see the supercluster's role in reviving Canada's economy in the wake of COVID-19 epidemic. So here's where are the opportunities to revive the economy through the work that you do. And I also want to just throw in one other thing. A lot of the people who signed up for this webinar are either in global affairs or they're involved in trade, they're involved in investment attraction at the provincial or federal level. So if you have any insights for that internationally oriented group of policymakers and practitioners, that would be interesting as well. But I'll start with Sue, and then anyone else can jump in.
Yeah, so when the superclusters were created, if we start at first principles, we were created with a mandate to help put Canadian innovation on an international stage while delivering valuable outcomes to Canadians and scaling Canadian companies. And when we look at the opportunities that come out of COVID, we are going to move from, and whether I don't know if it's going to be a pivot and a sharp turn, or whether it's going to be more gradual, from responding to the crisis to economic, and I don't think it's economic recovery necessarily at the beginning. It's we've got to get some confidence, and then some stability, some recovery, and then some growth. That's what we do in the supercluster. We bring organizations together. And I mentioned those 5 words earlier. We bring organizations together focused on solutions. And if we want to help the country move through the economic pipeline from stability to recovery to growth, stimulus and growth, then let's focus on outcomes, and let's focus on the key areas where we want to grow. Bill has referenced the critical issue around self-sufficiency, whether it's in the food chain, whether it's in critical manufacturing, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in skills and talent. And this isn't talking about protectionism. Let's talk about where we can leverage up the strengths that we already have. And those are areas where we have strengths. Like obviously we add in the fact that we are surrounded by 3 oceans and our global leadership in AI. It's no accident that the 5 superclusters focus on these areas. So I think we look at how we've operated in the past, and we look at what we've learned from the current, and the reference that I made earlier. We can be agile. We don't need to be buried in process. Process isn't a substitute for good governance. Agility and good governance work hand in hand. And we've been able to do that in this last 7 weeks around the supercluster table and in the economy writ large. We can move quickly. Our governments, both provincially and federally, are moving faster than I've ever seen them in my lifetime, and I'm old. And so we can move fast, and we can be agile. We can pivot or change our direction. We are incredibly resilient. We are saying literally overnight, let's make sure that we get healthcare workers supported. Let's make sure we get the food to the people who need it on the front line. And we're doing it much faster than we ever have before. And we're doing it in a collaborative way. And I don't just mean around the superclusters, and I don't mean with our supercluster members alone. I mean across governments. We're seeing federal, provincial cooperation. We're seeing provincial cooperation in ways that, for me, make me proud as a Canadian. And so when it comes to economic recovery, let's take stock of the good things that we've learned out of the last 7 weeks, and let's leverage them into building economic stability by showing confidence, our ability to deliver outcomes, our ability to move fast, and our ability to really focus on the areas of the Canadian economy where we shine and where we can be global leaders, because we already are in some ways, but let's leverage it up.
Great.
I have some comments on policy, but I think you're coming back to that.
Yeah, I'm coming back to that. And yeah, Julien, and then Kendra.
No, Kendra, please. Kendra, you were first. I think.
Kendra, you go first. Thank you, Julien.
I was in a meeting the other day, and someone said in a virtual world that Canada has every advantage, and that geography will matter less than capability. and we have amazing capability to build upon. And so Canada's time is now. And I thought that was a very good rallying cry when we hear so much sort of negativity around what is happening with us. And I think we have a key role. You know, one of the challenges that we see with our companies is innovation and R&D headcount is a discretionary spend. And so when they're looking at keeping the doors open and they look at costs that they can cut, that is one that rises to the top, as much as we know that innovation is something that you should be investing in challenging times. And this helps with that risk, right? We're helping to de-risk and continue to encourage innovation investment and the importance of that. And I think that is especially crucial, that role going into our recovery period.
Great, thanks, Kendra. Julien.
Yeah, what I would add is there's a major risk for Canada and actually any other country is doing things as we were doing before the crisis. And superclusters can help handle that. So if you think about companies, meaning companies need to invest in the future, and the first reflex for companies would be, wow, I have so many cash constraints, I will stop investing for my future, I will just focus on surviving. Actually, of course, companies have to survive, but they have also to think about, okay, what's next? And don't forget about investing and innovating, because the others, think about China, will do it if we don't do it. So one of the risks, and superclusters can definitely mitigate that risk, is not enough innovation by the end of the crisis. The other one, I want really to put emphasis on that, is startups. Meaning startups are going through very rough times right now. If you think about financing, if you think about customers, meaning it's like a full class of startups are going to die, suffer, not develop the way they were. So we can lose 6 months, 8 months, a full year of innovation in startups that are not going to make through the crisis. So as superclusters, we have a role to play, not by funding the startups, but by helping them through certain programs, or by helping them find customers and connect them with and I think that's very important. If not, we're going to lose a full generation of innovators and startups with a lot of capital accumulated already and knowledge accumulated already. That's going to be lost, because meaning nobody can survive. Big companies suffer, but smaller companies are going to die. So as superclusters, I think we have a key role to play. First, continue advocating about innovation despite the crisis and help fund that innovation. And second, really take a lot of interest in startups and how to help them go through that crisis, connecting them with our ecosystem and with program. I think it's a very, very important mission for us.
I'm glad you mentioned in helping startups, it's not just about money, but it's a lot about customers. Yeah, very good. Anyone else before I move to the last question?
Well, maybe this does kind of merge into the question about government policy too, but I think there are a couple of things that haven't changed. One is, as everyone has mentioned, our mandate to sustain and to develop world-leading capabilities in each of our areas of focus. The other thing that hasn't changed, of course, is the fact that Canada is a very small regionally divided market, and so the trade is exceptionally important to us, both exports as well as imports. I think both our mainstream projects in creating world-leading capabilities, that depends on our ability to commercialize those capabilities around the world, and certainly on our COVID projects as well. We're creating capability here that is, we're developing healthcare products that everyone needs, not just Canadians. And if one very operational policy issue, I would really encourage us to make more use of the Canadian Commercial Corporation to integrate them into procurement channels. And because here is an instrument, an agency that is unique in the world and that would allow us to be able to provide world markets with the types of products that we're developing for the Canadian market, but where we may have a surplus in the future. From the investment side of things, both in our mainstream projects and our COVID projects, we have a number of international companies that are taking part in these projects. They're all interested in our ability to help them navigate the technology and innovation ecosystems, in our case around advanced manufacturing. That's a huge attraction for investment, but particularly now, given some of the strategic importance of standing up more manufacturing capacity here in Canada. I think there's a tremendous opportunity now to attract investment and new product mandates into the country.
Great. So I'm going to ask all of you if you have one recommendation for government, for policymakers that come out of your experience in the COVID. But before you do that, because I want to really end at 12:30, and there's 5 of you, and even if you talk a little more than a minute, we'll go a little over if we have to. But I just want to tell everyone on the line, we are going to do a summary of this, so you will have that. And October 19th and 20th of this year, we're having the 19th annual Research Money Conference. The Supercluster CEOs are coming back for a panel, a 90-minute panel. And so wait for that. And we are going to be running more of these webinars between now and then on a regular basis, bringing other innovation leaders in. So we will email you all. If you want to get our free e-bulletin, it's called Innovation This Week. You just go to www.researchmoneyinc.com, and on the top right, you just put your email in and you can get every week our free e-bulletin, and all our announcements are in that. So with that, thank you everyone for participating. And now, wait for it, one policy recommendation, you can slip into if you have to, each of you, and we'll go from east to west this time. So Kendra first.
So that's very ocean specific, but before this all happened, we were working on the blue economy strategy for Canada. And we see, as we look to, we need to continue to be focused on obviously the current health risks, but also start thinking about what does post-COVID look like and how do we continue to push the economy. And for us, the blue economy strategy, and really being clear on where Canada wants to be and defining that as quickly as we can, so that the investments that we make are truly strategic and aligned to that broader vision of where we're trying to go. We see that as incredibly important not to lose sight of.
Excellent. So Julien.
Well, I'm going to be very blunt. Extend us as soon as you can. We need visibility.
That's very pragmatic. Good. Okay. Jay.
I agree with Kendra about being to think strategically about what the future looks like, and bringing that into consideration in terms of short-term response to COVID. But I would also say that the importance of coordination and collaboration, not only across government departments and agencies in one government, but also between the federal government and the provincial governments. Our biggest overall arching objective is to fight COVID. And I don't think that can be done by individual agencies, departments, organizations like individual superclusters or levels of government. I think it's a whole of Canada approach.
Great. Bill.
So just maybe in terms of policy in the agriculture and food space, holistic approach, you can't have good policy for the plant protein space. You have to have policy that supports the whole of the agriculture and food production system in Canada. And I would say maybe creativity around support for growth capital in the short term. The markets are going to be very dry, and we need to maintain the momentum that we have.
Great. Sue.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, so as of this morning, we have in the digital supercluster 39 projects valued at $116 million that represent 67 million of industry investment and 49 million of supercluster investment. That's all focused on the future economy. That's focused on digitizing every element of our economy and capturing the incredible data that we have across this country in every industry, whether it's agriculture or whether it's healthcare or whether it's the oceans. If there's one policy that I would like to see our governments deploy, it's supporting the digital transformation of Canadian economy and society. If I can slip in a second one, you're only going to get that done is if you have a very significant focus on the rapid reskilling of employees as we move from a traditional economy to a digital economy. And that has to be done in a tripartite way: industry, education, and government. So rapid reskilling of staff, of talent across the country so that we can focus on the future economy, which is going to be a digitally based, data-driven economy.
Thank you, Sue. I think the one thing, if you'd have one thing that this crisis taught us, is that when you have a clear goal, everyone can come together. Our clear goal was to combat this crisis. And what you've done is you've shown that there are other goals that we have to hold out. And once we have them and everyone's aligned, then we're going to really run. So thank you all very much for the work you're doing and for the work you're continuing to do. And let's all survive this crisis and rise from the phoenix from the ashes. Thank you very much for everyone. We are now done.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.